Hi, everybody. Matt George here. While I was recording the podcast with Jerry Reynolds that you are about to hear, I had missed the news of the Sacramento Kings signing forward sharpshooter Doug McDermott. So we do not mention McDermott at all in this podcast. And instead of rushing together and putting together something really, really quick to attach to this podcast and take away from my great conversation with Jerry Reynolds, just wanted to let you know I'm aware of it. It's happened. It's a big deal. And if you want to weigh in on this deal, feel free to do so in the comment section. We can start the conversation there. I will have on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Kings, after the Kings and Clippers podcast, I'll spend more time talking about that Doug McDermott signing, why I think it's a really, really solid pickup for the Sacramento Kings, and whatever else happens or may happen between now and the end of that game. So it's aware. It's happened. Doug McDermott is joining the Sacramento Kings. I like the signing a lot. Now, please enjoy this podcast with the one and only Jerry Reynolds. On today's show, the one and only Jerry Reynolds joins me to share his perspective on the Kings' 0-4 start to preseason. What is there to be concerned about? What will work itself out? Plus, Jerry's thoughts on DeMar DeRozan joining the Kings and more right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News, and I'm always starstruck, truthfully starstruck, every time I get the opportunity to just have a conversation with Jerry Reynolds, former Kings head coach, former general manager, absolute broadcast legend. Jerry Reynolds is an icon, basketball icon here in Sacramento. And he is a guy that I grew up not just watching on Kings television for so many years. I idolize the man. And to have the friendship that I have with him and be able to talk Kings basketball with him every single time is a dream come true. And he's always so nice and so generous with his time to come here on the Locked On Kings podcast. And I'm really excited for you to hear what Jerry had to say about the preseason so far. There are some real concerns, and Jerry and I will kind of work our way through it, but we'll also kind of separate through our conversation what's real and what to pay attention to, and some of the things that will probably more than likely work themselves out. And also how this start to the preseason might be in some ways what the Kings need, maybe a necessary wake-up call for them to start the season with the right kind of attention to detail and the right focus on the job that needs to be done and how difficult that job is going to be. So a lot of great stuff here from Jerry Reynolds. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Feel free to jump in as well. Join the conversation, share your thoughts on what Jerry and I are discussing. You can do that on Twitter at MattGeorgeSack. Email me, mattgeorgesports@gmail.com, or leave your thoughts in the YouTube comment section down below. But enough of me. Let's get to Jerry. Instead of all of us running around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to figure out how much we should be worried about the preseason or how much we shouldn't be worried about the preseason, why not talk to somebody who's actually coached through preseasons before? Former Sacramento Kings head coach, general manager, legendary broadcaster, the one and only Jerry Reynolds joins me here on the Locked On Kings podcast. Hopefully, Jerry, to help calm some of us Kings fans down as the Kings are 0-4 so far in preseason. Before we dive into the specifics of what we've seen and what you've seen from the Kings in preseason, can you take me back to how you handled preseason as a head coach? I know the record obviously doesn't matter. You don't want to go into the regular season not having won a preseason game just for more momentum or even pride's sake. But how would you approach the preseason and using that time to most prepare yourself for actual regular season games?
Yeah, I always thought, of course, back in my day, we play 8 preseason games.
Whew.
So, which is ridiculous, but we needed to do it to make money, to stay afloat, and we'd go everywhere in America that would give you a good, decent guarantee. So that was a primary focus there of the team or franchise. But so I use it. In other words, those early 3 or 4 games, basically it would just be to get the main guys some minutes every game, kind of build on it. It might be 8-10 minutes the first game, go to 15. By the fourth game, they're playing maybe a half, and then of course, and try to selectively look at a few guys. If you thought in our case, just finding anybody could play NBA basketball was kind of a key. That was cheap and available, and so basically, I'd try to kind of in effect give them a chance to showcase in those early games a couple of different guys, and then we'd make bring in other guys during the last 4, still searching, type thing, and then I wouldn't play the main guys in games 5 and 6 hardly at all, and then in game 7 and usually in game 8, the last one, I would try to play them like a regular game, and like you say, you wanted to win some games, and I always felt good if you could get a win early in one of those first 4 or something, then that just so you had a couple of wins in there, it just didn't mean anything, but it made you feel better about how you approached the last game. I mean, you certainly didn't want to go into that looking for a win, but you also wanted to go into it trying to get your team ready to play their first game. And so we tried to play it pretty much, like you would a first game, because you always had a week off after that. So it wasn't like you're wearing them out or anything. I know people sometimes worry about injuries, but at some point you got to, you're going to play 82 games. Somebody could get hurt at any point. So, trying to save guys from an injury by, taking them out with a minute to go or some of that stuff. I mean, guys get hurt in practice about as much as games.
Yeah, there's an injury risk for guys every time you step out of the door, really. But I think a lot of athletic trainers would say, too, you don't want them to go in cold to a full 82-game season now going at 100% without having warmed up. And it's funny, you talk to most of the Kings players, and they're definitely emphasizing and working on specific things, but conditioning is the number one thing that they bring up. It's like we get out there and just to run up and down the floor and play at an NBA level and get the feeling of playing basketball at that level again. So I know Malik Monk said something about that, but clearly Mike is trying to use this time. Mike Brown and the Kings coaching staff is trying to use this time to work on some specific things. And what's interesting, Jerry, is in a lot of ways, those specific things are paying off. I ran through some of the numbers. Even though the Kings are 0-4, one of the focuses has been offensive rebounding and generating second chance points, where they're generating over 20 second chance points a game, which would have been first in the NBA last season. They're generating 14.5 offensive rebounds a game, which would have been third in the NBA last season. They're generating over 20 fast break points a game or around that number, which would have been first in the NBA. So they're finding success in areas that they're definitely emphasizing. The concern that I have, Jerry, and whether or not it should be a concern, maybe you can help out with that, is the areas of expected strength with this team in regards to shooting the basketball in particular. That's been terrible. They're shooting 25% from three-point range in 4 games. Now, you can chalk this up to a cold stretch, but I also am seeing essentially the Kings can lose to anybody if they're not hitting shots. And right now, nobody on the Sacramento Kings looks capable of knocking down a shot at a consistent rate.
Yeah, the scary thing is that Domas looks like the best shooter.
Yikes.
And I mean, so that, that's just not his forte, but he's been making, his mid-range shot very well. But yeah, I agree with you. I think that's the part that, you just hard to wrap your head around, is that they can't make shots on a team that has made shots. So I think that'll come around. I do. There's too many good shooters, proven good shooters for years that they won't. And so is it just a slump? Is it taking some questionable shots? Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think that probably some of those 3-point shots probably could be turned down a little more and trying to get into the mid range, probably be better off. think Boston, I mean, certainly this team needs to shoot a lot of threes, but I'm not sure you have to shoot 50. If you're not making them, you certainly don't. And so that part. And then, to your point on the offensive rebound, that's almost a double-edged sword. If you're not making any shots, there's a lot of offensive rebounds to get.
True.
So I think it's that's a little bit of a catch-22. So I mean, they are doing better there, but I think I guess my main concern with this team so far is making the threes and defending the threes. They just simply have done both in both areas very poor.
And that goes back to defending the threes, Jerry, goes back to last season. And Mike shared with us last season that if the Kings were league average, we're talking like 15th in the league in three-point defense, they would have been a top 10 defense. That's how bad their three-point defense was, is how far it dragged them down. And while the addition of DeMar DeRozan was phenomenal this offseason, and we're very excited about it, I'm curious to get your thoughts on DeMar joining the Kings and how great of a player he is. The Kings didn't really address two major issues that they had, which is one, defensively, and two, size. In fact, they got smaller because they got rid of Harrison Barnes, one of their bigger wings. So I understand, and it's clear to see there's a re-emphasis on the offensive end and the Kings trying to get back to what they were offensively 2 seasons ago. But I don't know if the Kings just expected these issues to go away, or if they expected their offense to be so much better that it would just carry them through it. But that's another concern that I have to this offseason this preseason. The offense hasn't been good enough to carry them through the clear defensive issues that they still have.
Totally agree. I mean, that was, and I still think it could work, because I think this team, it seems to me, could be capable of getting 120 a night and just outscore people and win. Now, they haven't done that, but I think that the potential is there, and I totally agree with you. It didn't really address some major concerns as far as I was concerned. Length, especially at the power position, and size. They're just not a very big team. And then maybe the other thing that has concerned me, and I think that will be resolved here shortly, is the bench. The bench in the preseason has been awful. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but I think it applies. It just hasn't been NBA level bench. Now, getting Herter and Lyles, now that McLaughlin is back, and you got Monk, and Lynn, now all of a sudden you've got 5 guys that I think you could feel like you have a reasonable bench. And then maybe later Carter, if he's as good as you hope, will give him something in a limited rookie campaign. So that could be resolved. So I'm trying to, kind of keep my purple glasses on here a little bit, but I do like this team, but I think there are clear weaknesses, and to me the lack of size means you do have to score a lot, and you really need to, I think, create a lot of turnovers, which they're not. They're not really. Now, it's preseason, and I understand with veterans, because I remember with Weber and Divac and those guys, they had sleepwalk through preseasons. I mean, we'd be a 60-win team, but go 2-5 in the preseason. So I understand that with proven veteran guys, they're looking at 82 games, coming up. And so you got to kind of factor that in. The old sky is falling. Well, it's not falling, but the clouds are hanging in there a little bit. And so they've definitely got to get better on the defensive end, I think, not just the 3-point, but I really expected Ellis and Fox, and I still expect that for them to come out of the gate really with ball pressure, and I think, you've probably lost a tiny bit. Harrison is probably a better defender than DeRozan, but it's close. And I think the improvement of Keegan will make up for some of that, because he's, bless his heart, a third-year player, and you're expecting him to guard everybody's best guy.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you just have a feeling, hey, I think the game's going to go this way. I think this team's going to win. I think this player's going to have this play or this big moment. Or even like a prop bet hunch, something silly, something random that you feel like is going to happen. FanDuel is the place that you can go to get all the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. All the information you could possibly want, all right there in front of you for you to make the best decisions with your money and hopefully make money with that high sports IQ that you have. And when you get started on FanDuel, place a $5 bet on anything, whatever it is, win or lose, does not matter. You get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. $5 is all you have to risk. You get $200 in bonus bets. No questions asked, right then and there. Head to FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Something you said there, Jerry, I actually have a little bit of a problem with, and I'm wondering if it's just trying too hard to be concerned about something. You talked about like, hey, it's preseason, and like going back to the Sacramento Kings of the early 2000s, right? They'd sleepwalk through the preseason is what you said, because they knew they were going to be great. They knew they were going to be fine. They were worried about playing in May and potentially June. They weren't necessarily worried about playing in early October. The Sacramento Kings, this version of the Kings, as talented as they are, they haven't earned that. And the concern that I have is in the Western Conference. The Western Conference is brutal. Like every single night is going to be a tough game, and every game is going to have significant playoff implications because of how close we expect the West to be. And you attach on top of that. And I think this is where kind of the wounded Kings fan syndrome kind of comes into play for myself and other Kings fans too, as you think back to last season, you think back to this team's inability to play consistently against different competition, right? They play really, really well against the Lakers or really, really well against this team. And then they would lose at home to Detroit or lose to Washington or get blown out by Portland on the road. I wanted to see this team, especially with the addition of DeMar DeRozan. I understand it's human nature. Like this game doesn't count. There's no need for me to go all out like I'm playing in the playoffs. I understand that completely. But I think I wanted to see more of an element of, we're supposed to beat these teams. Let's look like it. And they've shown that in stretches. Like I thought how they started game 1 of the preseason against the Golden State Warriors was fantastic. And in both Warriors games, by the time Mike took the starters out, they were leading in both of those games. So the losses in that sense doesn't really matter. But I think with the Portland game last night with Utah, these are two teams that are expected to be beneath you in the West. And I don't think that's disrespectful to say. I wanted to see more of a, oh yeah, the Kings are clearly better. And we just haven't seen that yet, or seen it enough.
Yeah, you make a great point, and I was kind of going to mention that too. Is like, yeah, those teams in the 2000s, they knew they were good. They'd proven it.
Right.
They'd won 55, 58 games, and so it's a little different. And I think that's one of the weaknesses of this team, as you pointed out. I mean, it's a team that's good, but I think they kind of get too full of themselves that think they're a little better than they are. And that's how you lose to, the bottom, the dregs of the league at home, is thinking, I'm here. That's enough. We'll show up and beat these guys. And the Weber guys could do that. These guys aren't that talented, and they really do have to have a little more focus, a little more, come in with a little chip on your shoulder. I've got to prove it every night. And I agree with you. That's part of what has disappointed me a little bit, and then, it's like Malik Monk saying he may have been tired in the port. Even if it's true, don't say it.
Right.
Don't say it. You're an NBA player. You haven't played big minutes. It's preseason. The team you're playing, they have played the same games and the same practices. So, anyway, yeah, I think that's, I think it's a concern. I think it's a fair one. It is preseason, but you also, this is a good team. They've proven themselves to be a good team. They haven't proven themselves to be an elite team, and that part is what you want to see, and you haven't.
So kind of turning that on its head, though, and in more of maybe a positive way, maybe this is really both of us putting on kind of the purple colored glasses a little bit. Is there an element of this where, okay, you go 0-4 in preseason. Hopefully you don't go 0-5 against the Clippers. But again, if you do, it ultimately doesn't really matter. It sounds like Mike is once again going to look to play the starters as close to a full game as possible, just to get them as ready as possible, because they will have a full week off before their first game of the season against Minnesota, which is not going to be an easy game by any means. But is there an element of this to where, okay, the Kings are experiencing it, Is there any element of this preseason that might be a wake-up call to these guys? Like if you're Mike Brown and the Kings coaching staff, you're looking at this and going, okay, we see the issues. We know we're going to get reinforcements, but we have this group. They're getting, like, I think back to the Kings, the year they made the playoffs, they went 0-4 in their first 4 games.
Yeah.
And then they took off. Maybe this is their early 0-4 start, and that gets them a little more comfortable together. Regardless of how good we expect DeMar DeRozan to be, they're still implementing him. They're implementing new guys and trying out new things. So is there an element where you feel optimistic that this is a good learning experience for this team, and ultimately they're going to grow from this, and maybe this will kind of wake them up a little bit to how ready they need to be come game 1?
You know, I'm not sure how much learning, but I'll tell you this. I think it's a great motivational thing. I think, and Coach Brown and his staff, they know, I mean, it gives them a great opportunity to kind of have a few come to Jesus moments with the young lads. Maybe say something that might hurt their feelings. You know, you might even go to those depths. So I think it can be a good thing, because you know, there needs, you know, clearly there needs to be a little bit of a wake up call. I don't think anybody hardly just, and the way I look at it, yeah, it's a great time to have a wake up call. And so, and I think, you know, you got an outstanding coaching staff and front office. They have plenty of ammunition to jump some guys. You know, sometimes, you know, if they're 5-0 in the preseason or whatever, you know, like, yeah, okay. Yeah, right. We'll be, you know, we're fine, you know. But the way it's been, I think they have some ammunition, and I'm pretty sure they'll use it, know how to use it.
And I'm pretty confident in the guys' ability to take those criticisms and hopefully turn them. I don't get the sense that too many people, if anybody on this roster, is close-minded to being held accountable. Accountability has been a big word amongst this organization over the last handful of years since Mike Brown has taken over. But Jerry, I've been itching for months to get your thoughts on this, because when the Kings, very soon after the Kings acquired DeMar DeRozan, I had a conversation with an assistant coach in the NBA, and he told me that he thinks that not only does DeMar DeRozan help get the Sacramento Kings offense back to where it was, he thinks DeMar DeRozan addresses the biggest weakness of the Kings offense from 2 seasons ago when they were number 1 in the NBA. And he's talking about specifically having a guy that, whether it's late in the shot clock or you're on the wrong end of a big run, he's just another guy not named De'Aaron Fox that can just go out and get you a bucket to stop the bleeding or hit a big shot when you need it. Because De'Aaron was that guy, and that's it. How do you feel about having a guy like that you're just, things aren't going right, we're kind of in a tailspin, DeMar, just right the ship for us on this play? How important is that to have for a team?
You can't win big without it. I mean, that's an absolute fact, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, he's got, you know, he's got the receipts. I mean, he's done it for years, and he had maybe his best year last year. I mean, so is he slowing down? Doesn't seem to be. He's actually can shoot the ball deep a little better than he ever could. So, yeah, in my mind, yeah, that's exactly what they did. They got another closer. You know, they got to, and maybe to me, the most important thing that's a little bit overlooked with DeMar. Not only does he get to the line, he makes them, of course. But here, maybe the most important thing, he draws fouls, which get you in the penalty. This was the team that didn't get in the penalty often enough, soon enough, especially in the fourth quarter. And, you know, as you know, I mean, teams go through dry spell, they're not making shots. Well, sometimes, okay, you're not making shots, but you can get to the line, make points, stop runs, keep you in the hunt type thing. And I think that's where he will be at his most valuable. And fortunately, I think they've got a guy, Domas, who knows how to get him involved when it counts, type thing. You know, can get him the ball where he needs it, live dribble, 18, 20 feet, that sort of thing. So that's, I know that's one of the reasons I'm still so optimistic. I think they've got, you know, besides Fox, who has to, last year, I feel like he had to go create a shot every time, and that's tough. And especially when the other team knows that. Now you got to deal with 2 guys that you might have to double team. You can't double them both.
Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by Hims. Look, to put it bluntly, your sex life is important and your schedule is busy. All of ours are. You don't have the time to go to a doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through HIMS, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot out of the door. HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. HIMS provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor's visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, HIMS can help you find the ED option that works best for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compound products, which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription is required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. What I'm wondering, though, Jerry, is this is the first time maybe in DeMar's career where he's joining a team and he's not needed to be the top guy. Like he doesn't have to be, and I don't think he expects to be. And knowing DeMar, he's not coming into Sacramento and going, okay, this is my team now. It's my ball. Everybody get out of the way. Like, that's not how DeMar is approaching this. I think DeMar knows that he's coming in. He's not a role player by any means, but he's coming in to support less than carry. That being said, to start the season, while the Kings are dealing with these injuries and trying to figure some things out, do you think the Kings will need a little more of the version of number one guy DeMar kind of out of the gate to help carry them through these growing pains that they'll have? They're going to incorporate him more and more and get more and more comfortable with them playing together. But early on, I wouldn't be surprised if the Kings are like, DeMar, De'Aaron, we need you both to be 20-plus point per game scorers out of the gate and be your top selves while we figure everything else out. That might be a necessity for this group early.
Oh, I think it is. And I think with DeMar, what I've seen, he's an unselfish guy. I mean, he's been a truly prolific scorer. I don't think there's a selfish bone in his body. He'll fit in great. I think he's trying to fit in maybe to a fault. I think that basically they're going to have to say, DeMar, go be yourself. Go look to score when you get the ball. Be aggressive like you've been. That's what we got you for. And I think that, I don't think he expects to be the top guy. I think that's, kind of De'Aaron and all. And I suspect that he'll get close to his numbers. Fox will get his. I think Domas and Keegan numbers might go down, but they might be more productive. In other words, with Domas, he might get 17 points instead of 20 on 10 shots. That's fine. That'll make the team better. But because I think you got another guy, let's face it, Harrison could get big numbers once in a while. But the DeRozan is the kind of guy that on bad nights is going to get you 12, 15, and most nights get you 20, 25. And so, yeah, I agree. I like to say, I just from what I've seen, I see a guy that has been traded. He's a proven star, trying to ingratiate himself with his teammates, which is all positive. But at some point, you go be yourself. You're a scorer. Score.
That is honestly what you just said right there, too. I think needs to imply more to De'Aaron Fox this season as well, because even though DeMar is here and gives you another option, I think Fox needs to step on the gas pedal more than he ever has before. And there's more than just winning motivations behind that, Jerry. He's turned down multiple contract extensions because he has the chance to be eligible for the Supermax contract. In order for him to do that, he has to make an All-NBA team again. He did that once because of the amazing season the Kings had 2 years ago, and the Kings were so undeniable that the league just felt like, okay, we got to give them everything we can. And Fox absolutely deserved to be All-NBA that season. But the Kings will not have, unless they're like a number 1 or number 2 seed, they're not going to have the benefit of the doubt of just getting back into the playoff picture again and surprising anybody. So to me, the way De'Aaron Fox makes All-NBA again as a guard in a guard prominent dominant league, and there's no longer positions in all NBA. It's just the 10 or 15 best players. In order to do that, he has to score the basketball. I'm looking at Fox, and his passing is still important. His defense is still important. All that is great, and the Kings still need to win games. But I think De'Aaron Fox has to be as close to a 30-point-per-game scorer as he's ever been in his career. He's hovering around that 26, 27 mark over the last handful of seasons. Is it too simple just to say, Fox, if you're really motivated by, and I think this is hand in hand, by the way. I think the Kings win more games if Fox makes an all-NBA team. I'm not saying he's going to be selfish by any means. But in your mind, is there a way that De'Aaron Fox makes all-NBA without becoming one of the elite scorers in the league? Like we know he's capable of being, but the numbers haven't shown him up there with the Lukas and all them in the world.
Yeah, I think it could happen, but it's all tied to winning. As long as the Kings say win 50 plus games, yeah, and he averages 22, but he's doing it on 15 shots or something, like extremely productive and a proven much better defense. Yeah, it could still do that because winning will do it. Now, the reality is they still, if Fox gets 30 a game and the Kings win 50 some, but I still think, in a nutshell, it's about winning. I think but you pointed out, there's so many guards. So it's going to be looked at the bottom line, who's winning a lot of ball games and who's the best player, because now you're adding John Morant back in the equation. Mm-hmm. So there's other guards, and so there's just, and the West is loaded. So the first thing they're going to look at, is wins, is just wins. And I think that will take care of it. I mean, not that Fox could be all NBA by averaging 14 points a game or something, but I honestly think he could actually score a few less and be better at it. And as long as the team's better, it would work out.
Well, I think we all know the Kings aren't winning basketball games if De'Aaron Fox is not the best player on the floor on pretty much a nightly basis, just based off how this West is. Last thing for you, Jerry, going back, tapping into your coach brain again. I asked this question of Mike Brown. His answer made complete sense. But the Kings are in a position where they can't wait, right? There's no going slow. There's no easing into the season. They have to hit the ground running, and because they could fall into a hole that is impossible to dig out of, not because they're mathematically eliminated, but just because the West is as difficult as it is. Like I'm expecting the difference between like the third or fourth seed and the 8th seed to only be 3 or 4 games. Like that's how talented I think this Western Conference is. So every single one of these games really matters. That being said, Mike and his coaching staff are clearly trying to implement some things in training camp. They actually, I was one of the media members that was lucky enough to kind of get a walkthrough of what they're trying to do. I'm not going to share specifics of what they told us because we keep that in house. But they have very, very clear plans in place, very well thought out ideas of how they want to play on both sides of the ball. I asked Mike, if you start the season and things aren't working, certain things, you obviously adjust, but does there come a point where you kind of abandon certain things because you don't have the time to see it through? From your coaching perspective, how stubbornly do you stick with things that you're like, we believe this philosophy will work, our guys just need to catch up? And how much time are you willing to give that while the losses might pile up early on and put you in a tough position?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with expectations, and so having said that, and I think there's high expectations for this team. So I do think sometimes maybe the patience level might not be as long. I mean, and they need to have patience and believe in what they're doing, but there is a point where you're 20 games in the season and you're 7-13. Well, you can't continue. You got to make changes because it's not going to be accepted from a fan's perspective. And I think with the coaches, they're bright people and everything. So yeah, there's a point. And I think, like I say, this team, even though they're not an old team, they've got a pretty good window, but the way they're looking at it, I think, is the way I'd look at it, is like, I'm not worried about a window. I'm worried about now, this year. And I think they still feel like, I think they feel that they are probably could use another piece or so, the right piece. And so they're, you still got trade deadline. I'd like to believe this could be a year to where hopefully if they're not going 100% like you want, they're a little bit below. They could do a Dallas kind of thing, a couple of not necessarily star piece, but things that really fit what they need. And of course, allow Dallas to go from, a questionable, even playoff team to the Western Final champion, and so he's getting a couple of guys at midseason. So, yeah, I don't know. I just think it's a little different, expectation of what they are. They should be high. You've had two winning teams and you've added a star, and now West is a bitch, and you can't control that.
Mm-hmm.
But you are expecting a winning team and a team that's going to vie for a playoff spot. I've said the same thing you've said many times. To me, the team that could be fifth there's about 7 teams that could be fifth or 11th.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that cuts your patience level down. It's that close, and so losing games that you shouldn't lose, there's a multiplier in effect.
I'll sneak one more in, Jerry, real quick. Mike Brown has told this story a number of times over the last couple of years, and it always fascinates me. He talks about when he was coaching Cleveland and he had LeBron James. They worked all summer and all training camp on a certain way that they wanted to play defense. And they got into the early season. They're like 4 or 5 games into the season. They're just getting their butts kicked, just getting destroyed. And Mike calls a timeout. And one point in the timeout, he goes, all right, guys, what do you want to do? Like, this isn't working. Like, what do you want to do? What should we do? And LeBron steps up, and this is young LeBron. He steps up and goes, no, F that. We've been working on this all off season long. We're sticking with this. This is the type of team we are. You do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. And the Cleveland Cavaliers ended up being a pretty solid defensive team that year. Now, of course, that's LeBron James. So it's not exactly apples to apples type comparison. But in terms of leadership, did you have a guy like that when you coached? And does the Kings need a leader like that? I think that's why Mike Brown is telling the story. Does that leader have to be one of the top guys like Fox, Domas, or DeRozan? Or can they get away with it being a middle of the road or like a role player type guy?
I think it has to be a top guy. I think it has to come from your top guys. It doesn't have to be your best guy, but it's like back in the 2000s, Vlade Divac was the leader.
Mm-hmm.
He just was. Weber's the best player, but Vlade was the guy the glue guy and really kind of made it all, pulled it all together. And, I think you go back, even through the years, when Mitch Richmond's here, it had a couple of really good, solid playoff team. And he was the best player and he was the leader. Everybody got in line. Everybody got in line. And, back to the first playoff team in 85, 86, Eddie Johnson kind of was that guy. But it's the top guy. It's got to be a top guy. So it has to be Domas, Fox, DeRozan. The one exception, it might be a Malik Monk. He's got a lot. There are differences where you got some elite and elite 6 man who everybody knows is one of your 5 best players. So I think that's a good point. And I think with this coaching staff, I think they're great at allowing guys to be leaders and having. Basically, at some point, if players don't want to do something, your best players, whether, may not be LeBron James, but if your best players say, hey, this ain't working. We got to do. I always remember coaching Danny Ainge, who was, terrific. One of the best players ever played. He just didn't play it very long. But we got into an argument about, how to play Mitch Richmond and how we wanted to play him and where we wanted to give help and this, that. And Danny was saying, no, let me just take him head up. I can guard him, he's a rookie or whatever. I can guard him. I said, okay, Danny, we'll go your way. And then about midway through the first half, called time and Danny said, Coach, you're right. I can't, I need help on him. And so, but I do think you have to, if your top guy feels a way, and generally speaking, they're right. If they feel a certain way, they're going to try to make it work.
Mm-hmm. I I remember that being a thing with Rick Adelman too. I remember Rick trying things a certain way, and C-Webb and Doug and a number of guys would speak up in practice too and say, no, let's do it this way. And that worked out pretty good for them. And I think it's a quality of a great coach too, to be willing to hear that and say, okay, let's try it your way. And I know Mike is a guy like that as well. So Jerry, always appreciate your perspective. Looking forward to having you back on come the actual season getting going. Hope to see you at the Golden One Center a time or two as well this season. It's going to be regardless of the stress of expectations, it's going to be a really, really fun, really exciting year. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts on it, whether it's on Locked On Kings or over on the Kings Herald podcast that you do. It's always a pleasure, my friend. So thank you so much for making the time.
Well, anytime, Matt. I love visiting with you and the fans. So, yeah, hopefully next time it'll be easier to get on. But that's a story that's for another day. But, yeah, I can't wait for season to start. I mean, I love watching this team. They're a bunch of good guys that are unselfish. They like one another. You can see that. You just hope they're as good as you want them to be. But, we're so lucky as fans. We've got a terrific coaching staff, front office, everything. It's just a matter of can they be as good as we want them to be. So we'll see.